I'm so happy to be back. And I I actually had this moment every time I went to a new city to like be like look around and be like, I wonder how much it costs to
I did
buy
the
a
same.
condo, right?
I did the same in
Uh,
Paris. We'll talk about this.
I
Hmm.
was gonna say, I wonder how much that was, but like, you think, oh, I'm in Bangkok, right? Like it's Thailand. It can't be. I remember saying to my daughter on the way to the airport when we were flying to the island, I was like, I wonder how much it is. She's like, Mom, it's so cheap here. Like it can't be. I gotta tell you, it was not cheap. It was not cheap at all. It was, I mean, I literally just pulled up my phone and did like a quick search of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
2 bedroom, 1,500 square feet, like that type of thing. Millions. Like it wasn't cheap. I mean, I don't know areas. I don't know it. Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Let's
Rachel,
go. Yes.
while you were in Bangkok, and also Greece, I believe. So
I
when,
was a week before the most stressful spring season of my life, but yes.
and we'll talk about like why it was stressful when you were away. So it's like, if you want to get busy, plan a holiday, right? All the time.
Everything sold. Everything sold. Everything sold.
Okay, we got to talk about that. So when I was in
Yeah.
Paris, I was with someone else who's a real estate agent as well, and we were both looking at the prices of homes. Sorry, apartments. There's not really homes in
Yeah.
Paris. Apartments.
Yeah.
Rachel,
Oh,
the same price as in
it's
Toronto.
here. Really, but which sorry, and like my husband would be
What
even more.
areas? I'm
I was
talking
about
about
to
like
say, but
Ma,
the sort mall or whatever they call them, like the
Molly's
area.
mom, Molly's mom.
Yeah.
Um, you're looking at Montmartre, which is like if you're gonna walk from the heart of Paris, from the
Soho-ish.
Louvre
Yeah.
to Montmartre,
Yeah.
it's like a 45-minute walk.
But it's also more boho. I don't know what it's like now because I haven't been in several years, but like it's
Stunning.
very, yeah, but it's like Soho, right? It's like Bohemian where the artists used to live, or maybe it was what Yorkville used to be now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've got all the accoutrements that you would possibly want, the views, like everything, mama. And it is comparable to that of
But
Toronto.
but is there air conditioning? No, it's all wall air conditioning, by the way. No central air. They're all old buildings,
True.
right?
They
Yeah.
do too, which is interesting, is that they grade the properties like A, B, C, D, E, F as far as energy consumption. So like you don't have to guess as a potential buyer, like how much is this going to cost? Like, is this like a like well done, what have you? So it actually has a grading
Yeah.
system. They have the
Interesting.
same grading system on food. So like you can look at a food and like packaging. It's like
Oh my God, I was just gonna say we could do a whole podcast that's not about real estate, about the food around the world. But anyway,
yes,
I think it's actually perfect that we're going on this subject because we are going to talk about where everybody in Canada is moving
yes,
today.
yes. And so
Yeah.
when I saw the prices comparable to that of Toronto, I thought to myself, two things. Number one, is there a crash coming? Because if I were to compare the value that you get in Paris versus the value that you get in Toronto, I'm talking about like Paris is like the epicenter as far as productivity goes, GDP, everything. Like France is better economically, surprisingly, than Canada by leaps and bounds. Like the value that you get in Paris, plus other costs are much lower than that of Toronto. So, for example, like your food costs, etc., like your overall living is better
Taxes.
in Paris versus
Yeah.
Toronto. So then I think to myself, if prices are like this high,
Yeah.
what's happening? Is it that we're starting to see a decline in Toronto? I want to know, Rachel, what you were seeing as far as everything flying off the shelf at the very same time that I was looking at these listings in Toronto. I'm talking about apartments now, right?
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, you'll speak to the numbers in regards to the movement. I mean, I guess we should just
Mhm.
unveil it. Like, where is everybody moving in Canada? Because there has been a specific shift of
Yep.
people moving to one, would you say it's city or a province?
I would say province is what we're seeing so far. And I'm trying
Okay.
to find the data right now. So
Yeah,
I properly
because
quote this.
right now, which is really, I always, whenever I have friends who are American who live here, or I have friends in the US or whatever, it always is so interesting to me how people will job hop through states, right? Like they'll
Yeah.
go, it's crazy, right? Like you're from Delaware, but now you live in Miami, or you're in New York and you go to Los Angeles. Anyway, and that's because they have so many major markets.
Yep.
Canada has two. Like we do. We have two. We have Toronto and we have Vancouver. And the reality is that you know, based on what you're seeing in these numbers that you're going to talk to, I'm not surprised that I'm actually surprised it's taken this long, but that it's not surprising that there's now an up and coming third one. By the way, Montreal would be the third one if it wasn't for the language barrier, because the reality is if you don't speak French, you can't live in Quebec. You just can't.
And
So so
all the barriers as well that are in place with
and I
respect
love
to
Montreal and it's gorgeous and the food scene and the people and everything. It's amazing and it's so European, but you can't. My husband
yeah.
was born there. I was born there. You can't.
Yeah.
So drum roll, please. Where is everybody moving?
So it's Alberta and specifically Calgary and Edmonton. In the latest, I was just want to pull up the data for us.
Yeah, yeah.
So in 2023, net interprovincial migration was negative for the first time in BC. They lost over 8,000 people. That's 67,000 people who left BC. Why? Because BC just recently outranked Canada as one of the most expensive places to live. And they're packing up and moving to Alberta. What's
Right.
fascinating though is not everyone is actually moving to the core areas in Alberta. They are actually moving to the outskirts because Alberta is starting to see another increase in housing prices as well, making it unaffordable. Why are people leaving? Two reasons. Number one, jobs, and number two, actually, let's reverse that. Number one, housing costs are much cheaper, and number two, jobs are actually more prevalent there.
Oh,
Oil's doing well. That's what happens. Oil does well, Alberta does well. Now, what's
they
unique.
also have an interesting government. Like what I see is coming, and I don't want to get political,
Oh,
although
no, no, see, go ahead, go for it.
you and I could, but I believe also that provincially that they have a government that's acting in a way that Quebec has acted in the past, in which we're good, we can take care of ourselves, we're not playing along with the federal government. And
Mhm.
I think that it could be part of the fact that they've had strong leadership in the past. There's no question. I can't remember who the gentleman was. His name is escaping me. But I just wonder whether because she's such a strong leader, whether that's adding to it. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think a few things. So I actually do believe it's less of the government and more of just economics.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, so if the interviews that are being conducted with these people that are anecdotally moving to Alberta, they're saying I get paid more for the same job that I'm getting that I have in BC. So I'm getting paid more, and
Interesting.
my costs of living are lower. My food costs are lower,
Much.
etc. And it's likely because the government there actually subsidizes, right? And they make when oil is high, their revenues are high. I believe they're one of the only provinces that have a balanced budget, right? So
Wow.
they're sitting there going like to your point, we don't need you. In fact, in 2023, here's a stat. Alberta saw a net positive of over 55,000 people moving to Alberta. Ontario saw the largest drop of 36,000 people leaving Ontario. Leaving
But
Ontario.
this is not shocking. I mean, but you know what? I don't know if you have these stats. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I remember, I don't want to even say back in the 90s, but that they had a boom also, and there was a big migration over to Calgary and Edmonton, and then oil crashed
Yep.
and no one wanted to touch it. So I'm curious to think whether this is listen, I hope it's a long term because I think we need to offer Canadians another place to live that they can afford to live because we can get into the Toronto market and we'll do a market update next week when the numbers come out. But it's unaffordable. Like the reality is, and listen, Trudeau just came out and said out loud that we need to keep housing prices stable and increasing because this is what the boomers are going to retire on. And I mean, I'm not a boomer, but I hate to say it, I'll get a lot of flack for it from, the millennials generation and younger, but I'm okay with it. Like I want to see, I want to see obviously my investment in my house increase. But where does that leave people who go to Calgary if it's a fluctuating market.
And I think a couple things that the government, I don't know if they're doing this well, but they have been, I've noticed another thing. So I'm in the prop tech space. Companies typically are born in Ontario, Toronto, specifically, maybe Hamilton, and then out west. Like that's it, folks. What we've seen for the first time in the last year and a half is a boom of prop tech within Alberta, and what in clean tech specifically. So if oil does go down, if Alberta has built the infrastructure for startups, plus capital investment into the startup culture and the startup world, plus the services, banking, lawyers, accountants that go along with it, then Alberta, for the first time in its history, may be able to insulate an oil shock. Having said that, I think oil is still going to dictate job growth as well as the boom and bust cycle of the real estate industry there. If you look at the homes, if you've ever been to Calgary, you'll notice homes.
Edmonton.
No,
Sorry, all those Edmonton
sorry,
people. Yeah.
sorry, folks. It's changed. It's changed. But in Calgary, for example, you'll see the difference in homes based off of oil booms. So you'll see an oil boom from the 90s, home style from the 90s. Then you see the next oil boom, I think it was like mid 2000s. And like, so you keep on, you see the booms like in the 70s as well. Like, so you
That's what
see.
I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I wonder. So what I would be doing, and I'd be paying attention to if I was a younger person and I'm putting all my eggs into my basket, moving out to Alberta. Number one thing you always want to make sure is that you're actually able to afford the home in the event that you are out of a job for a couple of months, right? Number one, and number two, it's a place that you can easily rent out, assuming that there will be renters in the event that there is a bust, and you are in a situation in which you lose your job as well. And then finally, I would make sure that my job isn't so strictly tied to the oil industry. And maybe
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So migration is moving out there. Still, like what makes me sort of laugh, or not laugh, but like wonder is, is Canadian real estate just going to stay that high? Which puts me to the most recent article that I've been reading from the office. I will always forget the name. I always call it OFSI, but they are called I just said like the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Information. Their annual risk report came out for 2024 and 2025. Before we dive into that, Rachel, I want to hear what happened when you were in Greece. You said all your homes closed. Like what happened? So we're talking about, but like, I want to know what is going on in late April and early May.
Um, I really think it was, the old cliche, like if you want to get busy as a real estate agent, book a vacation. Like I'm not joking. I mean, it was the worst time for me to go away. As you know, the first trip was a work trip for my husband. So I had no choice. But I think it was just a matter of timing. Like really, I think as I said, when I got an offer on a property when I was getting onto my plane to go to Bangkok on my next trip. And when I was in Tokyo in the lounge in between, I was sending back like I had to get the Wi-Fi on the plane. Thank God it was actually very good. Shout out to Air Canada. It was a great Wi-Fi. But I think that was more of an like, yeah, I think that was just a funny story about the fact that things were selling. And I always notice this in every single market in the spring. And I think it's just human nature. And I think people are just, either, leaders or they go with the pack. And, you'll always get those people who come out early in the season who are like, this is the time. I've got a spreadsheet. I love people who have spreadsheets, and they've done their numbers and they're like, okay, you know what? Let's get out there. Let's find something. It's time for us. And then there's other people who are unsure. And we're still in a recovery market. That's the reality. People are back in it. Things are selling, but they're not selling consistently. And there's nothing selling. Well, I wouldn't say that. Sorry. I would say single family homes anywhere between, the 800 to $1 million, depending on what it is still something, that can get multiple offers. An agent on my team has been looking in Durham, like Durham's having a revival, and in that 800 to $1 million, they're getting like one of them she pitched on, they had 30 offers.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, having said that, it's an insured mortgage, right? Like you don't have to have 20% down. These are first time buyers wanting to get in because I think all the things that we're talking about, people are getting nervous about getting priced out.
Again.
They will. I truly believe unless we have a massive correction, and we could. I mean, listen, I think we've had a massive correction since COVID. I mean, I've watched certain areas and certain investment properties that there are things that I know would have sold for more back in COVID. There's no question.
Like 100,000 more on a million and a half, or
Oh,
like
100,000 more. Yeah, 100,000. I mean, it depends on it depends on right? But for sure, I would say easily 10 to 15% difference in, now it depends on the property also, right? Like, so I would also say there's a demand for like that single family, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom house, anywhere from 1.2 to 1.5 also. Absolutely, without a doubt.
right. And are those homes selling below COVID prices?
Um, yeah, I would think like that 1.5, 1.6 probably would have been 1.7, 1.8. They would have. They just would have because people can afford more and they were paying it. And I've been watching a property for a client in the 905 that wanted to be there for a few years. And I would say like prices are only starting to balance out there and come back close to what they paid during COVID.
Right.
And I think that, we've talked about this in the sense that, this idea of that Toronto real estate doubles itself every 10 years. I think this will be the first 10-year cycle. We don't see that.
But you're
I
still
really
seeing it
don't.
going up and
I
not.
don't, I think it'll go up. I think, listen, real estate, the longer you hold on to it, and it's like market crashes, everything repeats itself. But the reality is that this idea of holding onto something for 5 to 7 years, right? We talked about that kind of being the sweet spot.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I no, like I think it like to make money to pay for your land transfer and all of that stuff. I think it's going to be longer. And I think that 10-year cycle is not going to see a doubling. I don't think so.
And you don't, and do you think so? A big announcement that's come down the pipeline, everyone's talking about it, is the federal government providing tons of dough, in the tune of billions, that it's going to be providing generally to each province, not each province, but as a bucket, and each province has a certain allocation, and they get access to these funds if they make building faster, right?
But hold on, what does that mean? Like, I'm going to go off the rails now, but like, how pathetic are we? Okay, so think about it. The builders pay a tax. The city, we pay a tax to. The province is influxing money. The
Yeah.
federal government is influxing money. Has anyone seen any houses being built? No, nothing's being
No,
built. So
it's
where's all the money going? Like, how pathetic is this system?
that's a really good question, because as money is
Where is
being
all the money?
so, and it's so interesting too, because Ottawa's push, they're offering what, 4 billion to help provinces like build homes, right? That's what it's going to be. So now here's the reality though. This is how I
Where?
see it shaking out. Is that while the federal government says build these homes, it's all about intensification. So get rid of single family restrictions, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's what's been happening in Calgary. There have been not protests, but tons of people showing up saying, we don't want these new zoning rules to come into play so that I'm beside a huge condo at my home. And in fact, real estate agents are seeing people trying to move out of the core in anticipation of this deluge of zoning. And so I wonder, and I don't know, but I wonder how much local NIMBYism is going to stop a lot of these builds from even happening.
They're not, I don't think they're going to. I mean, listen, they've passed two different laws in the last year that have increased density that like no one can do anything about. So you can now have 5 units. Was it 5 units on a house without going to committee adjustments?
Yeah.
And they just passed so this is Toronto specific, and they just passed the major road bylaw. So I don't know if you saw this, where now so they're identifying the major roads, okay?
Mhm.
But let's say like I live at Bathurst and Lawrence, there's between the Allen Road all the way to, let's say, Bayview when you hit the York University campus over there. There is single family over single family home on that major street. They
Mhm.
now are saying that if you own that house, you are allowed to rebuild or build onto to have a 3-story and up to 11 units on your property. Now, there are specifics, and I haven't dug into like the size of your lot and whatever, but it doesn't look restrictive. Like my first glance is not restrictive. So what does that mean? So now, how many people have looked at a house that backed onto a apartment building and they're like, I'm not touching that. I don't want people overlooking it. If you are in a house that backs onto another house on a major road, in the next 10 years, you'll probably have a very good chance that that will be a multi-unit property. That kind of stuff I think will bring. So here's the interesting, and I don't want to go off topic because we
No,
were talking
no,
about
this
people
is
moving to
really important.
Calgary. But to me, I think to myself, okay, I love this from solving a housing problem, right? Like now people are going to build on this property and they're going to have 11 units, and we now have rental units, or they're going to make a condo, whatever it is. For another episode, but why would I do that as after the capital gains tax that just came in? Why? So I just pulled up and I feel, I don't know why, like maybe it's because I've been away and I've come back and it's just one of the craziest. Next week we will do a market update and I will tell you why it is the craziest spring season I've ever seen in all of my career. But so this was from the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
Okay. Foreigners withdrew $6.2 billion out of Canada in Q1, and it is the first such divestment in 14 years. Statistics Canada reported.
Oh,
So
absolutely. I
it's
could say boots on ground. I see this.
right.
Startup. Okay, go finish your thought and I'll
No,
tell
no,
you.
no. So, but the point is like, so it doesn't surprise me when you tell me Vancouver's down, and there are people who have left Vancouver because there was so much foreign money and so much foreign investment in Vancouver. So they're like, why would I stay here? Why would I leave my money in here when now, what did it say? Something like, if you're an individual that's, and we will do all the stats for the capital gains episode, but it was something like, if you are an individual that owns a property,
Yep.
you are taxed at 50% of the like, so to explain everybody the way that works, I buy a house, it's worth $10. I go to sell it 10 years later, it's worth $100. So now I have to pay capital gains on $45, right? Half of the $90 that it
Yep.
increased in value. Okay, fine. If you are a corporation, you have to pay 62% capital gains tax on that entire $90. So there is this element of like the government pushing people not to own things in a corporation, which is I name only and I don't understand it. And I do need to dig in to understand that a little bit better. But why? Like I would like why I wouldn't buy an investment property now, like under my corp. I wouldn't. And that would be where I would buy it.
Absolutely. And then
Are they
also,
trying to get people to get their money out of their corporation, or people like I don't know. Anyway, yes, what are you seeing in the prop tech?
yeah, absolutely. Well, this lends itself, Rachel, like what you're reading is affecting all of Canada. And I think it in fact affects real estate in this way. So in the prop tech space, VCs are like, wait a second. I'm now already in Canada, it's hard to make money, right? In any sort of startup space. We don't have really good economies of scale. There are a lot of reasons. Down south, our neighbors, it's much more friendly just by way of like population distribution, economies of scale that you can get, so on and so forth. Now you're going to add on this capital gains tax issue, and a lot of investors are saying, forget it. And
Well, why
so
would you? Like it just
so
doesn't
why
make
do we
any sense.
care? Why do we care? Well, if we have less capital investing in Canada, we're less productive. So everyone talks about Canadian productivity rates that they're so low. That doesn't mean that people are in Canada are twiddling our thumbs. There's some data that I've read that we work actually more hours, take less vacation than our neighbors down south to in America. Yet
A
they're more productive.
1,000%. 1,000%.
Yeah, they're more productive than we are. France is more productive than Canada. France, which has like how much by way of
Okay, everyone's more
here's
productive
why.
than we are right
They're
now.
more productive because capital investment allows people to be more productive in what they do, from technology to infrastructure to how long it takes you to get to your office to traffic. All of these things have a factor to productivity, right? So that coupled with, again, just technology. So my point being is that if all the capital is moving out of here, that means your job might not exist, not you, Rachel, but generally the jobs of people might not exist. We won't get paid as much, which means, again, we're going to see a slowing the economy. Now, that's problematic if you're a young person that wants to buy a home, because while we have this slowing of economy, housing prices continue to accelerate.
Well, right. So think about
Further out of reach.
that, right? Coupled with the Toronto increased land transfer tax that went
Mhm.
up. And I remember everybody was like, what do we care? Like those rich people that, and listen, at the end of the day, if I'm buying a five, seven, nine, whatever $1 million house over $20 million, absolutely. Is that anything off their bottom line? Is that no, 100%.
That's
But
not
I'll
the
tell you
majority.
something. That's not the point. I will wholeheartedly tell you that the people that can afford those homes, and I don't know a million of them, but I know some, they didn't get wealthy by just giving their money away or buying things that didn't make sense. So here I am. I can afford a $20 million house. I'll assure you, I can afford a $20 million house somewhere else also.
Yes.
And it won't be their only home. So now I think, okay, so it's not my principal residence. I don't live there. I'm gonna have to pay capital gains
Yep.
on it.
Yep.
Uh, you know
Also,
what? I'll
like I
just
want the headache.
not live in Canada.
Yes.
And
And
guess what? Their money goes with them, which means it's not infused into our economy. It's not infused into our, so it's a trickle down effect. Like the bees. The bees are not going extinct for no reason,
yeah.
right? But that's my point. People think, oh, it's just the rich
No. No,
and the
it's
uber
not.
wealthy. We need everybody.
Well,
We need everybody.
here's an example. In fact, to your point, that's a really good example because CMHC just came out with their recent report as well. So we'll talk about OFC in a second. But they're starting to see is that the mortgage arrears are continuing to trend upward by the following indicators. And I want to get your thoughts on this. I'll read them out as to what CMHC is saying, what they see happening in the market. And I want to get your feedback, Rachel, on like what is like overblown. So first of all, the financial buffer accumulated during the pandemic is exhausted. So we're seeing that credit card data is showing that mortgage borrowers have a higher probability of filing for bankruptcy and they have an increased amount of debt. So that's number one. Makes sense. More debt, you have a mortgage, more expensive, right? All right, number two, growing use of debt to make debt payments. So the increasing share of
Yeah.
borrowers recording a low credit score and high probability of bankruptcy may also suggest that borrowers are either requesting more debt and or increasingly using up the revolving credit. Number three, lower to mid-income households are using up their savings to make ends meet. We're seeing that just fewer people are saving as much, increasing delinquency rates among credit products. We're talking about auto loans, credit lines, lines of credit, and more than a quarter of mortgage owner survey respondents are concerned about their ability to make mortgage payments. Now, mortgage payments and delinquencies are a laggard indicator. That's why I'm talking more about other credit facilities, car loans, etc. Because what happens is we first default on the car loan, we first default
But
on
we saw that, what,
that.
6 months ago? We saw
Yeah.
that late last year. We saw those starting to happen, right?
Yes. So I'm curious, what are you seeing? There's an expectation that mortgage arrears are going to go back up to pre-pandemic levels, right? So they all went down and then they're kind of rising up again. Is that a big deal? No, because our delinquency rates are very, very low. But the idea is if our employment, to your point about all the capital moving out, doesn't stay high in 2025, when we see the renewals coming up in 2025 and 2026, if our economy is soft, job unemployment is going down, we're going to see a problem as far as a lot of distress sales. What are you seeing right now? What are people saying?
So I personally, thank God, am not seeing anything of the sort in my client roster. I did see an agent this morning on a buyer visit who told me that she's never seen so many. Now she works, it's interesting. She works in a I wouldn't say luxury space, but a higher price point in the area she's in. It's
Okay.
a rural area with larger land and larger price point. And yeah, I mean, actually one of them was in Toronto, I think she even said, but I mean, again, I don't think that, and again, I can't speak to the numbers, I haven't seen them. I don't believe that this is where we're going to see that average family with two incomes and kids defaulting on their house and having to sell. What we're seeing are people in that space, very similar, going back to the cars. I can't remember the guy. He's amazing. This mortgage broker told me to follow him, and he's got the pulse on everything that's going on as like I'll
Ooh.
send you that. I'll put in the show notes. And I you didn't see Toyotas being returned, but you saw the Porsches and the Lamborghinis and the Corvettes that no one could get and everybody had to pay $80,000 ahead of time. Like you saw that kind of default.
Aha.
So I think that that's what we're seeing more in the real estate space also are the people that bought the $6 million cottage on Lake Joe, that bought, like she told me the story, that she had a client, he was a CEO, he bought this gorgeous property up north, not up north, but like, let's just say like an hour away from Toronto. And he lost his job 3 months later.
Oh my God.
And he tried to do a startup and he tried to like sustain it and he tried to figure it out and no, they had to like they had and it was a fire. So I think that those
That
are
doesn't
the
do with
things
mortgage
that
payments. That doesn't do with like it's not like he would be the type of person who's like, geez, I can afford this because I didn't think about interest rates going up in a couple of years. It doesn't fit my budget. This is like bad luck.
fair, but I think that if you can't buy something that you can, so you're right. I agree with you. On the other hand, I would use the analogy that like if you can only sustain it here and that can't be replicated, right? At like tomorrow. I think that's something you have to think about. Like if I'm a CEO and it's not my own company and it's not whatever, and how easily would it be for me to get rehired somewhere? Right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter. You have a great job. That's great. That's fine. But you have to think about this. Like I think about like not to go off topic, but I think about like some my first time buyers, right? And they go into a house, you know what I mean? And they're like, oh my God, like the numbers are tight and we won't be able to go on a vacation. They can afford it, whatever. And you think to yourself, they're going to be okay. And you know why? Because their income's going to do this. And
Yeah.
it's going to be tough for a couple of years. But you know what? The husband, the wife, they're going to get a promotion. They're going to get into a more senior job, you
Yeah.
know. And if either of them got like fired or laid off, they could replace that job.
So here's Rachel, like my thing. Ever since I was a kid, I like imagine myself, I'm like dreadfully fear going bankrupt, like really fear bankruptcy. And I already have a whole strategy. I'm like, if I get let go, I can work my way up Shoppers. I'll start as a cashier. I did it in high school, and then from there I could get into a managerial role. I could rent out the house. I could move in with my
Oh,
parents.
I love that it's bankruptcy. Like, where did that come
I don't even
from?
know,
That
but
you're
like
going to buy, and then you're working at Shoppers.
yeah, I'm like, forget
Okay.
being a lawyer, I'll work at Shoppers, cashier. I know it like
You're a lawyer anyway.
I
Okay.
like this is how I think. So like if I feel that like I always manage the down risk. Like I always manage
Not
that.
everybody does.
And that's it. Like I don't think that was really well considered. I even got some really bad advice from um someone that is a good business person who said counseled my husband and I take on as much debt as possible when we're looking to buy our homes because interest rates won't go down. I remember putting him on mute and going to my husband, I'm like, that is the worst advice I have ever heard. Ignore him. And this person was older and like you would think, and a business person that, you would think that they would
There were a lot of them, but also remember, I mean, I don't know who this person is and I'm not supporting him, but like there was a time where the government of Canada was standing out and saying, don't worry about it, spend money. Like, by the way, they're responsible. And I've said this from day one. They're responsible. Yes, everybody is adults. Yes, everybody makes their own decisions. Don't get me wrong. Everyone can listen and take advice. You go to a lawyer, they give you advice, and you can say, you know what, Atalka, I appreciate your advice. I'm going to take a little of it, or I'm not going to take any of it, or I'm going to take all of it. That is up to you. We are all allowed to do that. But they stood as the official leaders of Canada and said, don't worry, spend money. We are not going to raise interest rates. And not only did they raise interest rates, but they raised it the fastest, highest interest rates we've seen in over 20 years, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
So not such listen, I got similar advice at one time also, and the reality is that I think everybody was in this la la land of like everything's going to be fine, this is going to continue, we're in the middle of a pandemic, it's never, did we ever think that pandemic was going to end? I didn't think so.
I
I
did,
didn't think
and here's why. This is why I implore everybody to study history. Just study history. If you study history, you'll see. For example, every single pandemic in history, I'm talking about like Babylonian era. This is what happens. I'll tell you, Rachel. Everyone leaves urban centers. Everyone. They go out, boom, out of the cores, whatever. What did we see? Everyone went out of the core, but everyone then comes back.
yeah.
Right. So it's every single
Yeah.
time. And the second thing that happens, cost of labor actually goes up. And cost of labor went up. Why? Because there's a constriction on bodies being able to actually work, right? And so that happens, and then it goes down again. And so one thing that we all know in the real estate industry, it will go up and it will go down. It
Yeah,
will,
I mean,
it will go
the
down.
question I have right now is it going to go down further? I think that is the question, because right now we're seeing, excuse me, we've seen a correction.
Mhm.
Speaking, like summing this all up, because I know we're running out of time, I think the, although, and I've heard my, my financial crush, Benjamin Tull, basically come out and say the Bank of Canada doesn't care if they throw the real estate market into the toilet. Like that, it is not, it doesn't even register.
Mhm.
But what they do care about is whether people start defaulting and have no homes. And I still believe, I don't know if I'm being delusional or I just live in a naive space, but I believe that they know they need to bring the interest rates down. I believe that there will be an interest rate decrease. It'll be small, but it will be consistently small as they watch it, because they know people need a break or there's going to be something bigger. For example, and again, I don't want to get off topic, but I was listening to a podcast on the way home, and last year and this year had the largest completion of condo projects maybe ever.
Yeah.
So this year, can you imagine? So all these people are all busy, all these workers, all the construction, all
I
the
get to go next.
electricians, plumbing, everybody. And then we know that there's no projects.
Yeah.
Everything's being canceled. You know, people, barely the big guys like Daniels and Mankus are doing it. So then we have an unemployment issue.
And so I did hear about this as well, like the fact that there is no new construction. Like often you're already bidding on the next project that just hasn't been happening. I
No one
don't,
was bidding. No one was bidding.
I know there's nothing
But
to bid
now they've got so many bidders.
on. I thought there was also nothing to bid on. Well,
Yeah,
that's what makes
yes.
sense. Yeah, let's
There
nothing
is.
to bid
Sorry,
on
yes.
if there's a
Yeah.
concentration of bidders. It makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how big of a problem that will be, and I don't know how long that will last for, given that the government is putting money to the provinces in order for them to build. Here's something else that the government has not been thinking about.
It's not going to build it's not going to build like a toilet. I'm telling
Cost.
you.
It's
No,
the
no.
cost. It's the
Yeah.
cost of things are still quite high.
When you did your renovations, do you remember, like, think
Uh,
about it, how long it takes for some of these builds take 6 years. The
Mine was
Fed, the Liberals won't even be in power by the time that this even gets it.
And so I think a lot of this will be, I think it'll be retracted, revisited, redone. There's still going to be a lot of opposition from on a municipal level before a lot of these things will actually be implemented. It's just going to take far too long, which I think could be a good thing if, in fact, we have a lot of completions coming to market, because it may then offset any major dips in that particular space, assuming that the stuff that's coming to market is what people actually want to live in and buy, meaning it can fit a family of three. Unlikely,
No,
unlikely. And
no,
that's
not
I'm
the condos they build now.
yeah, I'm keeping my eye on that particular space as they start to come to completion, because even though other assets like a 3 bedroom single detached home is still in high demand, when people start to get like freak out, and if we start seeing massive correction, in the pre-con space, it trickles down. People get scared.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
so that'll be very interesting to watch as well. What I'm paying attention to is, okay, what will be our saving grace in 25 and 26 when a lot of these mortgages come up for renewal and will still be higher than what it was 4 or 5 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm watching but unemployment rates. Like I'm watching income. So if my income has
Employment
increased in the
rates, yeah.
next, let's say 2 years, or has increased significantly such that I can offset that increase in cost,
Mm-hmm.
who cares about the increase in my payments, right?
Yeah.
It's offset. That's what I'm paying attention to. And that's what I think everyone should be looking at is what is our employment rate doing? What are we seeing as far as people and their jobs and how much they're getting paid in order to offset any other increases in the mortgage payments?
They're not, but it's not. I mean, I heard a stat, something like, I'm going to get this, I think I'm going to get the year wrong, but let's say in the 1970s,
Right.
the average income in Canada was
Yeah,
$75,000
yeah, yeah.
and the average house price was $80,000. The average salary in Canada now is still $75,000 and the average home cost is $500,000. And by the way, you can't buy anything for $500,000 in
Oh,
Toronto.
no, no, no.
So that like, I remember when I bought my very first home, it was a joke. It was like, oh, you make $100,000 a year and you can't buy a house forever. I'm like, you can't barely buy a house if you make $1 million as a total income in your household anymore. Like when you think about it, who anyway, we could talk all day about that, but
And
yeah.
that's right. My point was more so those that already own a home, like watching the default rates, right? That's what I'm
Oh,
looking at as far as like what will
yeah,
happen.
no, I hear you. Maybe
Everyone,
I'm hopeful, but I don't think that that's where we're going to see it. I'm seeing a lot, you know what I am seeing? I'm seeing a lot of people stay put.
well, so what I meant is
Uh,
that I don't think we're going to see a tidal wave of defaults because I think the government is going to not allow that to happen.
That's what I
Like
mean. Yeah,
it's
I
not
don't
going
think
to
so
happen.
either.
But what I would be paying attention to as far as like affordability and that whole like what how this trickles down into the economy as far as people like less spending less, da da da. I would be
Yep.
focusing on that. That's going to tell me what's going to happen in the housing market.
Great. So our GDP will shrink even more. Awesome. I'm like, Natalka, let's be so positive. And I'm like, I'm just so frustrated by all the announcements by the federal government that are going to do absolutely nothing. And you know what? I have no belief that it's going to happen because there's never been an incoming federal government to ever get rid of a tax policy ever in history. But
Oh,
I think that Pierre hasn't said it and he's not going to hop on that bandwagon because he is going to get flack from it from the middle class or the lower like the lower class that he's still like he's on the wealthy side of the constituent, but I think that he may reverse the capital gains tax because he knows how painful that is for the economy.
the
But
economy.
for the economy. Forget people's pockets for the economy. The
Yeah.
reality is that between all we are not a friendly place to invest in. We're not where people come to do it. And as you saw, by the way, it's same thing. We're both on that same mentor program for Reach Canada, which is an incredible program. And you see that everyone's in the US. And then they tell and we'll have the calls with them and we talk to them and I'm like, yeah, that won't work here. Like there's not enough people. Like I think it's such a great idea and it's phenomenal, but that's why it's not going to come here.
Yep. And that means less productivity. It's just less.
Well, that was a positive episode, but you know what? Listen, I think people do need to hear what's going on. And, as I always say, like I always get flack on social about, agents are always saying to buy, to buy, to buy. Listen, people still need like roofs over their head and they still need to buy properly and they still need, but all the things that we talked about, like you need to make sure that you're buffering yourself. And
Yeah.
I see a lot more families who would usually go from like this house to this house are staying in this house and saying, you know what, I'm going to stay here because I don't want to take that debt on. I'm not getting enough to make the move proper, and it's going to and it's too risky. It's just
Yes.
too
A
much.
100%. Like, and to your point, when things get more expensive to move, what ends up happening is people don't move. So why do we care? What that means is less product. Well, why do we care if fewer people are selling homes? That means that demand continues to increase as our immigration does and our population continues to grow and not enough
Well,
supply.
record immigration. But yeah, but I mean, if you're going to move out, I have to tell you, like, if you're going to move from one house to the next, $500,000 doesn't do it anymore. I'm just telling you right now. You
No.
cannot move from one product to another for 500. By the way, a few years ago, pre-COVID, you could. So 500,000 no longer does it. Okay. And if you're thinking that you're paying anywhere from 2,700 to $3,000 a month on a mortgage payment for $500,000. So now I'm like, okay, so I'm going to buy up and I'm going to have $6,000 on top of whatever I had residual on the value of my home that I haven't paid off. Who's doing it?
No, it's
Doing it.
good.
So there you go. So people are staying. That's why, by the way, that's why we don't have an inventory because no one was like they don't want to sell their house because they're not going to buy anything.
Although inventory did increase in
In
April.
April. Yeah. And I think, and by the way, I'll tell you, if you're asking me what I'm seeing, I've seen it increase again in May.
So
There's like a flood.
is it because people are trying to get ahead of the capital gains tax?
No, they're all houses. I think again, like just going back to it, I think there's some people who are leaders and there's some people who are followers. And I think, and not to say it in like a judgmental way, but the reality is that I think there's some people who are like, okay, now's a good time. Like we're in spring season. I'm like, no, spring season was 2 months ago. Like if you wanted to do anything, you should have done it 2 months ago. And I have a client who's been looking like to downsize, and I'm going to say to her, I don't want you to buy anything now. We have a runway of maybe by mid-June, people shut down. So what have we got? We've got a 2 to 3 week maybe runway. I would say two if I felt comfortable. I don't want to sell our house in for 2 weeks. Like there's no way. There's just not, it's too risky. Wait
You
until
don't,
next spring.
you don't think that June, typically what I've seen is like as soon as interest rates drops, buyers come in. So you're in the
It's going
potential
to be very
June,
small. It's
because
going
it's
to
such
be
a
very,
small
I
drop.
mean,
You don't think it'll spur buyers?
I've seen a bit of a decrease
Right.
in activity. And I would also listen, I called last at the beginning of this spring season and last spring season. I said it's going to be a late spring because everyone doesn't know what they want to do. And it went like full force until the end of June. And I feel like it all got done 2 months ago. Like when I was away, right? Like early May, in April, it got done. And now I feel like there's a couple of people kind of being like, okay, maybe I'll list now. Maybe's not in this business. There's no maybe. You want to do it? Let's do it. Let's have a plan, get a strategy, timelines, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like the status certificate I'm waiting on.
We-
Sooner than later.
Yes. And like that, maybe we do a full episode on like crap that can go wrong.
Oh my God, that is the next episode, and I can recap everything that went wrong this season. But let's wrap up this negative Nelly one. And it's so good to see your face.
See you
It
too.
was great.